Why should your right to freedom of speech trump a trans person's right not to be offended?
Because in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive. I mean, look at the conversation we're having right now. You know, like, you're certainly willing to risk offending me in the pursuit of truth. Why should you have the right to do that? It's been rather uncomfortable.
Well, I'm very glad I put you on the spot.
Well,
I'm very glad that I have exercised my freedom of speech.
You get my point. It's like you're doing what you should do, which is digging a bit to see what the hell's going on.
So
and that is what you should do. But you're exercising your freedom of speech to certainly risk offending me. And that's fine. I think more power to you as far as I'm concerned.
Except you haven't sat there and... I'm just trying to work that out. I mean...
Ha, gotcha.
You have got me. I'm trying to work that through in my head. Yeah, it took a while.
It did, yeah.
Took a while.
Are basically alike in terms of personality, in terms of cognitive ability, in terms of leadership. But what it did find was that media depictions of men and women as fundamentally different perpetuate misconceptions, as does workplace bias.
Oh God, so it's my fault.
So
men and women actually are more the same than they are different. But the issue is that small differences at the population level can turn into very large differences at the extreme. So, for example, men and women are broadly similar with regards to aggression, although men tilt a little bit more towards aggression. So that if you picked a random person out of the population, male and female, and you guessed that the male was more aggressive, you'd be right 60% of the time. But if you take the 1 in 100 most aggressive people, they're all male. And that's why the overwhelming proportion of people who are in prisons are male. Now, do you want to equalize that, just out of curiosity? What about bricklayers? They're 99% male. And we've got about 3/4 of the population now in universities, in the humanities and social sciences, are female.
Yeah.
Are we going to equalize that? And men work longer hours. They work more dangerous jobs. They're more likely to move. They're more likely to work outside. They're more likely to participate in jobs in the STEM fields that are scalable. They make more money for those reasons. And that's all hidden under the idea that the reason that men and women make different amounts of money is because of their gender. It's a very simplistic analysis, and trying to
Michael,
address
I was just going to say, Sophie, can you come back on that?
What I'm trying to equalise is opportunity and choice.
Fine, let's equalise choice.
You agree on that.
But we won't get equal outcome that way.
And I think that what happens then, nobody knows, because we've never done it.
We do know. We know what's happened in Scandinavia.
But it's not fully got there yet.
No, but it's going in the opposite direction that everyone predicted. And strong.
And an energy company was about to go bankrupt. A new manager came in and said, OK, we've got to throw everything out and start again. And made a conscious decision based on his belief that it's a human right that men and women are paid equally. And so went out of his way to make the workforce within that company 50-50 as much as he could in terms of men and women being represented. So we're talking about engineers, we're talking about tradespeople, we're talking about in workshops, we're talking at the managerial level.
If you hire 50% women engineers and 50% male engineers, then the women engineers are less qualified because the pool of engineers is lower among women. So you can't hire 50% women engineers without producing a decrement in the quality of the engineers because this selection pool is too small. You can't do that on a large scale. You might be able to do that in one company.
Yeah, and they certainly argue that it's not tokenism and they're not hiring second-rate women.
They might argue that, but if you did it on a large scale, that's what would happen. Because look, you think about it mathematically. If there's 10 times as many male engineers as there are female engineers, and you insist upon hiring 50-50, then obviously the degree to which the female engineers are proficient cannot be the same as the degree to which the male engineers are proficient. It's mathematically impossible.
So you're saying don't even try?
No, I'm saying something much more specific than that. Now, one company might be able to do that for a short period of time in one isolated location. But there, of course, if you have a new manager come in and he's doing all sorts of new things, there's 50 reasons why the company is going to fail or succeed. And you can say, well, it was because of the gender equity policies. It's like, yeah, well, it's a multivariate problem.
But they do point to the diversity now of the workforce, to improved morale, to improved strategies on how to come up with solutions to their increased profitability.
None of that research is credible. There's no evidence whatsoever that diversity as measured by racial or gender representation has any bearing whatsoever on creativity, productivity, outcome, any of the things you're measuring. None of that research is credible in the least. It's not at all. Men and women make different amounts of money. Well, sorry.
Got 'em.
That's not a fine-grained enough analysis. More agreeable people get paid less.
You against the use of alternate pronouns?
I'm against the use of legislation to determine what words that myself and other people are required to utter.
But would you use alternate pronouns if a student asked you to?
I think I've made my position on that clear already.
Well, perhaps not to our audience at home who are just being introduced to this. Would you use alternate pronouns? And why not?
Because I don't believe that other people have the right to determine what language I use, especially when it's backed by punitive legislation. And when the words that are being required are the constructions, they're artificial constructions of people I regard as radical ideologues whose viewpoint I do not share.
Well, we have a graphic to show our audience at home, just some of the pronouns being used or asked to be used as alternates. Among them you see here Z or Zim, Z or here, Z or Zir, also hey, or a rather, and per. So just some of the alternate pronouns there. Professor Pete, when you hear Professor Peterson saying that this is oppressive, how do you respond to that?
The Peterson drama has done real harm to real people on campus. He's made it harder to be transgender or non-binary. I know this from personal experience. I'm non-binary and transgender, and I know how it's felt to be on the U of T campus for the last month. And I also know from private communications with other affected people. In New Zealand, where I grew up, academics have a statutory role enshrined in the Education Act to be a critic and conscience of society. So I think that's an idea worth exporting to Canada. So I'd like to give Peterson about a B+ for his critic role recently, and an F for the conscience part. A student once said to me when I finally obtained tenure, "Now, Professor, now that you have obtained superpowers, you must agree to use them for good, for peace and justice." So I invite Peterson to start doing more of that.
Well, Professor Peterson, those who are asking for this alternate use of alternate pronouns, they are saying it boils down to respecting their human rights. How do you respond to that?
I don't think it boils down to respecting their human rights. I think that it's an imposition on freedom of speech that's being implemented at a legislative level. I also think that if there was a naturally evolving solution to the linguistic problem that's being posed by a small fraction of the transgender community, that people would have already adopted it. We've never had a situation in the usage of English before that required legislation to produce a transformation in the manner in which people spoke. Has a very dangerous precedent. So it's one thing to tell people what they can't say. So for example, we have legislation making it illegal to do such things as deny the Holocaust. It's a completely different thing to demand that people use certain words when they're formulating their own ideas. And it's also absurd. I mean, here's one thing that's happened that I don't believe the formulators of this legislation ever foresaw. So in New York City, for example, there are now 31 protected gender identities. And I see no reason whatsoever why each of those gender identities can't demand the use of their own pronoun. And that absurd things like that have been happening on the University of Michigan campus, for example, where students have been given permission to tell faculty members and others what pronouns they're to be addressed by. And they're multiplying rapidly out of control. So the law is bad from an ethical perspective. It's sloppily written. And besides that, the solution that it imposes is practically untenable.
Well, sorry, excuse me for jumping in, but I want to bring in Professor Pete here because we did show those words to our audience at home, and perhaps the control room can show it to our audience once again. When you look at those alternate pronouns, I think it's fair to say that some people will see that at home and see that as very unwieldy, if you will. What do you say to those types of criticisms, including the one that you just heard from Professor Peterson?
Well, I'd like to encourage people struggling with this to be kind as their first impulse.